Shocking inability or unwillingness on the part of the leadership of the United States, of NATO, and of Ukraine is condemning a generation of Ukrainian men to pointless and avoidable deaths and is setting the stage, perversely, for what has been the unthinkable and to many in the West still is not even recognizing as the potential of a Russian strategic victory and a United States and NATO strategic defeat. Caught in the middle of this is the Ukrainian side, which of course is going to be paying the brunt of this fiasco, in that they continue to lose just tens of thousands of troops on a monthly basis, sometimes spiking up even higher than that. Now, you may think that that's pretty strong words. And, if you listen to many of the people in the West, and we're going to show you some shocking examples of that in a minute, you may think that, no, things are still going good. There's still the power of the West and the power of NATO and the economic might of the United States is still going to be able to help Ukraine overcome. But folks, it's not. Zelensky and Ukraine are now destined for defeat, and there's no way to reverse it. No rational path to avoiding defeat. I have said all along that there was no military path to victory for Ukraine. Now it's increasingly clear there's no path to avoiding strategic defeat. The longer we wait to acknowledge these realities, the more Ukrainian men we needlessly expose to death and dismemberment and horrific casualties, psychological and physical. As someone who has fought in 4 combat deployments and served my country for 2 decades in service, it anguishes me, just as for any trooper, to see men going into battle knowing that they don't have the capacity to successfully win their battles and to ultimately get victory, and yet they still keep going out there. I saw some video and some images today and saw some reports of some just incredible heroic work by the Ukrainian military around the area of Avdiivka. They're continuing to fight down there, and that battle is an ongoing thing. The trends are very clear. Ukraine is eventually going to lose that battle. It could take another number of weeks or even months before that happens, but the cards are clear that Ukraine's going to give that up, but yet they continue to fight. It's just remarkable how hard they continue to fight and how well at the tactical level, even though they certainly, many of them can see the same things that we do here, but they do. And so that makes it even more anguishing to me, because how is it that we can, in any good conscience, continue to send these men out there and give them enough information and enough ammunition and weapons to avoid outright defeat, like immediately, but knowing that it doesn't matter how much we want to give them, it's never going to be enough to reverse the course on the ground. The defeat is completely certain now, and we're talking diplomatically, economically, militarily, and politically. All of these things together. It's not just one thing. It's all of them in combination is trending against Zelensky really everywhere you want to look. And what I'm going to lay out here for you, it's not hard to see. This is not some secret information. This is not something that's hard to define. You have to read the tea leaves, folks. This is headline stuff. This is stuff that you don't need a military experience to be able to understand. You have to have a PhD in foreign policy to be able to look at the fundamentals that exist and have existed for 2 years to be able to recognize the truth of what we're saying here. Now, I just want to show you a couple of things here. We're gonna run through this pretty quick here, but we're gonna first look at the military situation. Now, the Secretary of State Blinken was at a NATO event a couple of days ago and made a comment about what they're trying to do in terms of ammunition.
Last week, NATO signed a $1.2 billion contract to produce 220,000 artillery shells. That's going to help allies restock their own arsenals, and it complements efforts by the United States, by the European Union, by Ukraine, to ramp up defense production. This will make NATO itself and all allies much more resilient for future threats as we move forward.
Okay, that's just fiction. I mean, his comment, that's just going to help us as we move forward. It's going to help the Ukraine side. It's going to replace those are just like lofty words that are totally disconnected from reality. I cannot more strongly tell you how that is just nonsense when you talk about the war. not about a particular fight, not even like the Battle of Avdiivka, though it does have implications there, but about the war. Now, Kirby actually, I think it was earlier today, actually addressed this issue and said it in a little bit more honest way.
So the EU said today that they would only be able to supply half of the million artillery rounds that they had pledged for Ukraine, and this comes at a time when US assistance has stopped. So how bad is all this for the Ukrainian forces?
It sure as heck ain't good. And this is why we need the supplemental funding. Right now, as you and I are speaking, we aren't sending additional security assistance to Ukraine. There's nothing left. We've got to have that funding.
Okay, that's apples and oranges, or probably more like apples and asparagus. They're not even related. American funding is not even related to the European Union's inability to produce artillery ammunition. They promised about a year ago that they would provide 1 million shells to Ukraine by this spring, and they're going to be about half of that figure. And who knows when they're going to be able to get more of that. American funding has nothing to do with that. We're not paying for their shells. That's something that the EU is doing. Our funding that we're trying to get is for different things here. And you even heard Blinken in that one talk about that even this 220,000, by the way, that may sound like a good number in isolation, but let me put it in context. That's about a month's worth of artillery shells in the war for Ukraine side. To the 1 month. And let me also point out to you, which he didn't say anything about, it'll take up to 3 years to produce that. That contract has just been agreed to, hasn't even been put into operation yet, and it will take upwards of 3 years to see that actually turn into reality. Ukraine can't last 3 years. They can't last 2 years. I don't know how they're going to last 6 more months at the current trends. But even with that minuscule number, Blinken actually admitted that a portion of that is going to replenish the shells that we've already given and some of the other Europeans. So that means that Ukraine 3 years from now won't get 1 month's worth of shells. They'll get some smaller number if they somehow manage to survive even that long. How can our senior leaders stand in front of a global audience like that and say such nonsense? Now, somebody who knows nothing about any of this information, they don't know anything about military affairs at all, and they just hear him say that, part of the problem that we have with our governance today is a lack of trust. Well, folks, this is one of the reasons why there's so little trust. Now then, you can't believe anything they say because people hear them say that, and you're supposed to believe them because you think he must know what he's talking about. Then you hear stuff like what we're putting on this channel here, where you get the unintimidated truth, not what some of the other media is glossing over or just failing to tell you about. But then you find out the truth, and now then you look and you go, well, he said something that wasn't true. So now then your trust is also eroded underneath there. So there's a double shot here. But for the Ukraine side, in the immediate side, this tells you that there's no help coming, not anything they needed. This past summer, when that failed offensive that they launched, and we've talked a lot about, they were shooting around 7,000 shells per day. Well, now then it's down to about 2,000 shells per day. It's a math problem. And you see, European Union's not going to be able to ramp it up in time to change that in any fundamental way. The United States hadn't even allocated any more money. We don't have any more shells that we can give out of our own inventories because we've already gotten into the bone already of our own stuff. Now that we're trying to get contracts just for our own equipment, just to replace our own losses that we've had. But there hasn't been any more money allocated yet. And I don't know if it's going to come. I've been saying all this time that probably it would be another, some smaller percentage of it would come. But now it's not even clear that's going to happen because of the politics in the United States. That remains to be seen. But what doesn't remain to be seen is there's no money yet. There hasn't been any money since the last batch ran out. And so right now, there's nothing coming. The pipeline literally is empty. Now let's look at the tactical situation here. Gary, if you can throw up that battle map from the Institute for the Study of War. This is from earlier today, as of with the information as of yesterday. Some of the key things here for the Institute of the Study of War, and believe me, they are as pro-Ukraine as it comes, and they like to spin everything in a way that's as positive for the Ukraine side as they can. But even they admit the Russian forces have recently confirmed advances near Bakhmut, Horlivka, amid continuing engagements along the entire line of contact as of yesterday. And that includes Avdiivka in the south, where Russia has made some UK Ministry of Defense reported that the Russian defense industrial base can produce at least 100 main battle tanks per month, and is therefore able to replace battlefield losses, allowing Russia's forces to continue their current tempo of operations for the foreseeable future. So while the Ukraine side can hardly produce anything on their own because Russia has the ability to knock out factories all over the country because of their missile capacity and the inability of the Ukraine side to shoot down enough of their missiles. So there's like hardly anything in the pipeline that Ukraine can get from all the sources, and the Russian pipeline keeps getting bigger and bigger, and there's no interdiction to that at all. So if I stop the video right here, you could say just on the military capacity alone, this war is over. It's just we're just unwilling to see it, and we see the troops are in the field and they're still fighting, but they're getting pushed back all across the line of contact. And all of the trends say Russia is improving and strengthening, and Ukraine is weakening and losing power, and that their shell inventories continue to dwindle, and they cannot be replaced fast enough, folks. That's enough right there, but it's not all there is, because there are also some other issues. So now then, let me jump into some of the regional problems. Recently, there was a 2-month blockade of the Polish truckers had blocked all the pathways between Ukraine and Poland. And look, that was just resolved partially a couple of days ago, where they have waited. They're going to try to do some more negotiations that's good until the 1st of March. So barely a month from now then that thing could be again. And this is a long going on issue that Poland and many in the European Union are upset because of the flow of goods, and especially agriculture and other products into the EU at cut rate reduced, because Ukraine is trying to make money any way they can. Now, they don't want that because that cuts into European agriculture, and it's really causing problems for the Polish economy because they feel like their farmers and some of their livestock companies are losing money because of cheaper products coming in from the Ukraine side. Of course, the Ukraine side, said, "Hey, you guys are supposed to be our allies." Well, there's a lot of bad blood there, and there's many of the countries are also in the European Union are looking to return a lot of these refugees that have been in their country from Ukraine since February, March 2022. And then as we just had up there on the screen, you have the issue of Hungary, which has said that they are not willing to agree on a European Union financial package of $50 billion to the Ukrainian side. They have several concerns that they're worried about. Well, this is actually threatening to split the EU itself, because they're threatening Hungary that if they don't lift their veto and allow that package to go through, they're going to take a bunch of actions against Hungary. So now that you're potentially splitting the EU itself, because they don't believe that Ukraine can win. And that's one of the reasons Hungary doesn't want to give this money, because they think it's a waste of money to try and stop what's already self-evidently not succeeding. Then you have an issue of, let's see, in the United States and the European, there's just not that much cash. That's kind of additional to this. You see the grim realization to CNN put it is the state of the Ukraine war is funding fights continuing Washington and also in the European Union right now, because of the clash between the White House and the Republican Party over the border issue. The Republicans want to tie any kind of aid to Ukraine into a package that also gets them what they want on the border. And of course, there's lots of election year politics involved with this. The Republicans don't want the Democrats to get a win. The Democrats want to win. They're even willing to give in a lot on some border issues policy wise, but not on everything. The Republicans want everything because they're willing to play politics with the Ukrainian funding, because they realize this war is over. It's not going to matter. If they thought that this money was going to literally be the difference between life and death, one or both of the Republicans or Democrats would say, okay, we'll just give in on this particular batch this year because we've got to get that funding to Ukraine. It's the difference between success and failure that they know it's not. So they know that even the Democrats know they can play with that funding by trying to hold it up as a reason to say bad things about the Republicans because, gosh, you're willing to do this, but we're not going to give in on this border issue. So it's not important enough to them either. Both sides are in the same. Bottom line, no money for Ukraine so far, and there may not be any. But that's not all. There's also the economic performance. This doesn't get talked on very much. When this war started, we were, the West, especially in the White House in particular, was talking about how they're going to have the most incredible sanctions, the most punishing sanctions in the history of the world against Russia, that we're going to crush their economy so that they'll see that there was a real price for what they're doing here. How's that worked out? Well, according to the economic experts here, in 2023, so just last year, the Russian economy grew by 3% in 2023. Meanwhile, the European Union actually was anemic. I think overall it was like 1%. Germany, in fact, is in a recession. They actually lost money. And ours, of course, is I think at about 2%, which is better than some forecasted, but still less than Russia. Let that sink in for a minute, folks. All of these sanctions that we've done, all this hardship that we wanted to put on Russia, what did that do to our allies in Europe? It stultified all of their economies. It's gashed the German economy, which is supposed to be the engine for all the economic progress in Europe. Ours is stalled at 2%, which is better than some forecasts, like I said, but still not as good as Russia's. And so we tried to strangle them, and yet it ended up having more rebound negative effects on our side. So that didn't work out the way we wanted to either. Now then we have, as though that's not enough, now then we have issues for Ukraine on the domestic front. So at the beginning, I remember, you may remember also lots of articles about Vitaly Klitschko, who's the mayor of Kiev, who many times we're talking about he was a former boxer, and now he's fighting the Russians and all that, and he and Zelensky were shoulder to shoulder and doing all this stuff. Yeah, that's changed as well. Now then, Klitschko himself accuses Zelensky of lying about the war, of becoming a dictator, of becoming an autocrat. So there's a huge split between them because Klitschko is accusing the Ukrainian leader of doing all kinds of illegal activity, of corruption, and he's just tired of the way things are going on. So there's big dispute there. That's bad enough between two political leaders. It gets worse in the Washington Post just yesterday, or maybe it was even today. I think it was actually today. Yeah. Zelensky has basically fired his top general, Zelensky. Now, this may come as a shock to most Americans, but if people who've been watching and paying attention, it's almost like I'm surprised it took this long. This has been simmering in the background for a long time. There's been lots of divisions between those two, all the way back to the Mariupol fight early in the war, then some other fights later on in several Donetsk, and then especially in Bakhmut in late 2022. Zelensky said he wanted to withdraw from the city because it couldn't be held, and he wanted to preserve his forces and tighten the lines. And Zelensky was absolutely unwilling to do that and says, no, we are going to continue to fight for every building, every inch, every floor. And of course, they ended up lost tens of thousands of troops in the process, troops they didn't have for their offensive that might have made some difference anyway, but they didn't have it. So they clashed about that. Now then they're clashing about other things, about mobilization. Are they going to be able to mobilize 500,000 people? They want to, but Zelensky wants one thing. Zelensky wants a difference. They want to blame each other. Potentially, Zelensky is going to be a political rival to Zelensky. All kinds of things going on. But now that he's been pushed back, and it's not totally official yet, but that's coming by all the reports that we're getting. But what is absolutely certain is, yet again, you see this complete political domestic division and chaos within the Ukraine side. Now, just imagine if you're one of the fighters on that Avdiivka fight I mentioned at the beginning here. You're one of these guys who are on the front line. You're fighting day and night for this. You know that your side was promised by your by your president in early 2023 that you're going to have this big offensive and that you're going to succeed and that you're going to get to the Sea of Azov and cut the Russians in half. And you saw that nothing happened. You saw that all your troopers died. So all the things you were told turned out not to be true. Now that you hear that the senior political leaders of your country are squabbling with each other, you see that now that instead of having 7,000 rounds per day, you have two. So he's not able to get victory on the battlefield. He's not able to get victory with his allies, so he can't get the supplies that he needs. And now the commanding general of the armed forces, he's firing him. And by the way, he's been very popular among his troops because they recognize he tried to do the things that would protect them. Zelensky didn't. Zelensky did things that caused him to lose thousands of troops and the territory. So they ended up losing both. And now then, what are they to think? All of these people are against each other. All the promises they've made has not worked. And you're asking them again tomorrow, go out of that foxhole, go in there and fight those Russians and try to prevent Russia from going back any faster. And you know that your friends are dying left and right, and you know at any day it could be you. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine how hard it's going to be for you to maintain your fight? And now I think I said at the outset of this telecast here that I was amazed at some of the reports I've seen from just today about how incredible and brave the Ukraine side is fighting. But that just adds anguish to me, because why are we asking these men to make this heroic sacrifice when all it's doing is slowing the degradation? It's not going to change it politically, economically, militarily, diplomatically, every way you want to look. This war is over. It's lost. There's no rational path to go. I don't care how positive the Secretary of State says these comments about it's going to make a big difference. It's not. It's a drop in the bucket. It's a few weeks of shells 3 or 2 years from now. And the war will be long since over before that ever happens. And yet that's what he's continuing to say. And unfortunately, I've got one last thing that shows just how depraved and how unreal, unwilling to look at reality our leaders are. Because I think it was at that same press conference that Blinken made that statement a second ago when he's asked about what is the ultimate objective of this war. Here's what he has to say.
I think the process that we've seen in actually record time, first with Finland and now with Sweden, demonstrates that NATO's door is open, remains open, including to Ukraine, which will become a member of NATO.
How to unpack. I don't even know hardly what to say to that. The Secretary General of NATO, Stoltenberg, admitted it, I think it was in December of last year, that they knew that it was NATO being pushed into Ukraine, which sparked the war. That Putin apparently privately told them, if you go into Ukraine, if you push forward with NATO application for Ukraine, it's going to be war. This is, of course, in the context of a couple 100,000 troops of Russian troops around the border. So NATO knew that just talking about moving NATO into Ukraine was going to spark a war. So that's what drove it. And of course, Putin has never said anything besides that. That's been what they've been saying since 2007 at the Bucharest summit, by the way. So for 15 years before this war even started, Putin had always been saying that. So it's very clear. Now then, when all of those things I just told you, and God help us if if the Secretary of State is not aware of all of those categories I just rattled off that show how this war can't be won. Instead of saying, hey, what can we do to try and find a negotiated settlement? What can we do to try to end the suffering of the Ukrainian people, end the destruction of their cities, end the loss of all the life and territory of Ukraine? What can we do to help our friends out? Instead, he keeps on with the same fiction that started this war, the same thing that's like putting a red cape in front of a bull and telling Russia there's no reason to even think about a negotiated settlement. Keep pressing forward on the ground until we militarily win everything, because otherwise they still think Ukraine's going to be in NATO. That's just nonsense. And for him to declare and say, because they will be, that's fantasy thinking. In fact, you can even say it's bizarre and detached from reality thinking. No, my friend, Ukraine is not going to be in NATO. Not now, not later, not ever. It's never going to happen. And that was true from the beginning. Many in NATO privately said before the war started that they're not going to be able to come in NATO. They don't qualify in any capacity, and for even possibly decades into the future, if ever. That was before the war. Now there's no chance. There's none. The longer we keep on with the fiction, the more these people that we claim to care about, the Ukrainian people, will suffer. the more of their men will have their limbs blown off. They'll suffer traumatic brain injuries. Will suffer PTSD, and those are the ones that survive. Ukraine needs to get this war ended as soon as possible, because for them to have any chance to recover and rebuild, they're going to have a male population that can do it, that can work, that can be the next generation of leaders. Folks, they're getting killed off by the day. Do not tell me that you care about the Ukrainian people, Secretary Blinken, if you're unwilling to do anything to end their suffering, or if you're just unaware of all the things I just outlined here, which anyone with basic understanding can realize there's no practical path to even surviving if we keep going on without negotiated settlement. Because by putting blinders on and ear muffs on, all you're doing is hastening the day that Ukraine is going to lose, to the point to where at some point there may not be negotiations, there may be victory or defeat, terms surrender. It may be that simple. Now, many people can't even believe that's a possibility. I'm telling you, there is more chance that Ukraine will one day have to have negotiations over terms of surrender than they will ever have of having a negotiated settlement on terms beneficial to Kiev. That was possible, by the way. We'll point this out at the end here in April of 2022. They had a position of strength from which they could have negotiated a relatively good end. They gave that away. We'll probably won't know until historians tell us years from now what was really going on behind the scenes. We don't know. But what we do know is that there was a shot for peace, and it was rejected and destroyed by the West and the Ukraine side. Russia was ready to have a negotiated settlement then. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who were alive at that time are dead now and could have still been able to live. Cities could have been untouched and living and thriving today. And instead, they're rubble. That's the truth of it, folks. I'm here to tell you the truth, because you're not hearing this on other channels. The major media will just report just what people like Blinken said there with no context. And you're left wondering, this just doesn't seem to make sense. Well, I'm explaining to you now why it doesn't make sense. And your intuition is right. This is nonsense. And it's time to change all that. And it's time for our leaders to finally recognize the truth, because if they don't do what's right, if they don't do what's rational, then all of these things that we've been talking about here, all this destruction is going to continue. The deaths will continue. And then one day we'll have to do the unthinkable and figure out how we're going to live in a world where the Russian military militarily defeated their foe, and we've got to live with the aftermath of it. And I can assure you that's going to be a pretty hard pill to swallow, and will not do anything good for our national security going forward. Thanks very much for listening today. That's your deep dive. We're going to continue to bring you the truth, and we'll continue to bring you all this information as it breaks, both on this war and the one that's raging, unfortunately, in the Middle East, which also, unfortunately, could be expanding soon. But we'll keep you appraised of all that. Thanks for and like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.